And then, in this extremely simple-minded scheme, no serious decisions have to be made anymore. It's obvious. Who is going to choose the side that has such guys as Hitler and Stalin in there? Nobody wants that. And it's suggested that all the others are on the goody gumdrop side, so we don't have to make any choices. But this isn't so. This is so for people who don't want to grow up, that they have the idea that one doesn't have to make choices, that everything is simple. It looks as if moral conduct had here been reduced simply to psychological maturity, that we don't have to grow up and face the frightening complexities of life. We are saved from all serious choices, serious quandaries, from dread responsibility. There's no need anymore for tragedy. We can have all good things without missing anything worth having. But I think Sartre, with his much more tragic view, is much more nearly right here. Take a very simple issue that should be much on our minds these days. The people who say our survival is at stake and may hinge on agreement on some absolute morality. Now, what then is the standard? Should it be survival at any price? Would it be better for humanity to endure for a few more thousand years under a Hitler, or in Huxley's Brave New World, or in some ant-like state with drastically reduced potential, or on the other hand, let us say, to have a final great flowering of culture far exceeding anything yet known, and then to perish nobly? I don't want to say that this is a black and white choice. It's a difficult choice, and one has to discuss it and consider it. And I think each of us must decide after painstaking reflection and discussion what he is to value ultimately. Some people say monogamy is clearly right because there are approximately equal numbers of men and women, and so it follows that this is the best arrangement. But in Germany, for example, at the end of World War II, there were ever so many more women than men. Should we then conclude that, of course, in that situation it's all right for one man to have many wives, and in other countries for one woman to have many husbands, but in most countries monogamy should be the rule? Or might we not have to face the possibility, which Plato, much more radical, did face, that perhaps the whole institution of marriage might be a bad thing, and perhaps under certain circumstances ought to be abolished? What I'm trying to do here is not solve these problems at all for you, but lend some substance to Sartre's suggestion that we do ultimately in morality have to make choices, and that we can't turn to some daddy figure who will tell us, I have studied religion, or I have studied science, or psychology, or medicine, or what have you, and I'll tell you what's good for you. No appeal to science, no appeal to expediency can settle the central moral questions which concern ultimate standards. Because what is expedient, what is good in this instrumental sense, always depends on what your goal is. And while science may tell us how various goals can or cannot be reached, it does not tell us what goals to seek. Now, the enormous question that a man like Sartre faces, after having said something of this sort, and of course much of the detail here was mine rather than his, by way of lending substance to what I take it is his view, the enormous problem that he faces is whether he is not now confronted with moral anarchy. How can he, if he says there is no such human nature, we have to choose our standards, how can he then avoid complete moral anarchy? And I think he has not found the answer to this question, though he has tried. The big question, if you want to put it differently, is how can he distinguish between a responsible choice and an irresponsible choice? Well, this is what he tried to do in his famous lecture on existentialism is a humanism, and I think that that attempt in his lecture was clearly a failure. I think it was very ill-considered. What he suggested, and I'll make a very long story very short here, what he suggested distinguished the responsible choice from the irresponsible one. What he thought warranted his rebuttal of any charge of anarchy, what warranted him in saying that there was responsibility possible after all, was that nothing can be better for us unless it's better for all. And this, I think, is very clearly wrong. And I find it quite astonishing that a man as steeped in André Gide and Friedrich Nietzsche as Sartre is, should have said that nothing can be better for us unless it's better for all, seeing that as I read André Gide's novels and as I read Nietzsche's philosophy, this is their bête noire. This is the thing that they were fighting against all the time, this idea that nothing can be better for us unless it's better for all. Now what Sartre wants to do is in this way introduce responsibility. And how it doesn't work comes out beautifully in his own example. If he says, I decide to marry and to have children, even though this decision proceeds simply from my situation, from my passion or my desire, I am thereby committing not only myself, but humanity as a whole to the practice of monogamy. I am thus responsible for myself and for all men, and I am creating a certain image of man as I would have him to be. In fashioning myself, I fashion man. That in a lecture, I think, is fine rhetoric, and it's a noble conclusion, but it doesn't stand up. If I marry one wife, I'm not necessarily implying that monogamy is better for all. It's not at all irrational or irresponsible to suggest that I propose to make a go of it with this one wife without having any wish whatever to limit other people who have more money or who are sexually different inclined or who find themselves in quite a different situation or environment from behaving quite differently, not marrying at all or having more than one wife. Similarly, if I choose to have 2 children, I needn't object to other couples having either no children at all, or 1 or 3 or more. When we consider choosing a profession or writing a book, the point is even more obvious, surely. When I elect to become a philosopher, I don't imply that such a career is better for all. It's quite conceivable, although I'm not trying to make any great confession now, it's conceivable that I would prefer being a great composer, or that I would prefer being a Michelangelo, but that I find that I haven't got what it takes. Now that wouldn't mean that if therefore I become a philosopher, that I should feel that other people more fortunate than I should become philosophers too, or the other way around, that others who happen to lack whatever gifts I might have ought to follow my example. Take a still more specific case, which leads it utterly to the absurd, and that is suppose that I decide to write a certain book. Now in that case, surely I don't want everybody to write that book. If I knew that even one other guy was writing that kind of a book, I would want to change mine. So I think that in his attempt to meet the charge of irresponsibility, Sartre has failed. And here I will just take a swipe at somebody else, being very close now to my conclusions, and we can explore that more in the discussion if you want to. I think Camus is another man who has failed at that point. Camus, too, somehow wants people to make responsible choices, thinks there is nothing that is absolutely right for everybody, but I think has been unable to give a criterion for what makes some choices better than others. This comes out very movingly in what many people consider his greatest work, La Peste, The Plague, where the central character, a doctor, takes the attitude that if a man wants to leave the town and turn his back on the rest of mankind and just seek his own happiness, well, no reason can be given why he shouldn't do that, but on the other hand, he wishes that such a man wouldn't blame him for doing what he does. Here you have a resignation in the face of this problem. And with this I come to my conclusion. I think that existentialism has the enormous virtue of recognizing the nature of the modern crisis, which I think other philosophers on the whole have not been doing. And further, existentialists have occasionally diagnosed this crisis exceedingly well. Nor have they been defeatist about it. But when it comes to their positive prescriptions, I think it's fair to say that this has been, on the whole, their weakest part. If you turn to somebody like Kierkegaard, he suggests that we should throw reason out the window. When it comes to Sartre trying to reintroduce responsibility, he fails. But too many English-speaking philosophers have been playing ostrich, and it's a good thing to have people who face up to a crisis and diagnose it honestly, even if they don't quite know what to do about it. And here then is another answer to the question which I have tried to answer at the end of the first lecture and at the beginning of the second lecture, and now again at the end of the third, why one should study men with terrible views. Not because of their occasionally terrible prescriptions. Plato, too, offered some perfectly dreadful prescriptions, but rather because they face up to problems and see connections that other people don't see. You might ask in the end whether I think that some of these problems can be solved, and the answer is that I have tried to solve some of these problems, particularly some of the ones that I've been talking about today, in my next book, The Faith of a Heretic, which Doubleday will publish next summer, but I don't think that this is the time for going into my own solution, because my topic is existentialism and the modern crisis.